name's Greg, and for the last 6 months I've been traveling around and speaking at tech conferences on the subject of mental health in the tech community. The reason I've been doing that is because I have bipolar and ADHD. And when I started talking about this stuff about 6 months ago, I had a suspicion that there were others like me, might not be struggling with bipolar or ADHD or ADD specifically, but certainly depression and anxiety and other mental health issues. What I've been totally blown away by so far is just how many of us are. Let me tell you guys my story. When I was 20 years old, it was in the summer of my sophomore year in college, a buddy and I started a .com. It was called debtforsale.com. It was a marketplace for distressed debt. We sold it about 6 months later for what was effectively $1,000 in a polo shirt. It was one of those all equity in a company that went defunct thing. But it was just an incredible experience, and it changed my career. It made me know that I was going to spend most of my time at the intersection of the internet and small business. But I still went back to school, and I hated school. I sucked at school. I was just not built to do school. But I was kind of, I was smart enough, I could fake my way through it, I could show up to the last couple classes, I could cram the night before the final, and I could do well enough, to get by. And it was kind of to my detriment because I slid past on that for a couple years. And then once I finally, caught up to those 300 level math classes and CS classes, that strategy stopped working for me. So I got to my 5th year, my victory lap, as they like to call it. But it wasn't very victorious for me. Life was just really piling up, and it was pretty obvious that I wasn't going to make it, and I didn't know how to deal with that. I didn't know how to deal with the fact that all my friends were graduating, and I wasn't. I didn't know how to tell my parents that they'd just wasted a bunch of money, and I got really depressed. And I started sleeping about 12 or 16 hours a day, and back then, the best time of my day was when I was unconscious. That was when I didn't have to deal with the life that was just piling up all around me. I stopped going to class. I stopped going to work. Most of my friends had graduated in 4 years, so I didn't have a lot of those around, but I did have one friend. This guy's name was Bill, and he had noticed that I had stopped coming into work. We worked together. And Bill had sent me a couple emails just saying, hey, Greg, what's going on? And I ignored him because I didn't know how to tell him. And then one day, it was about 2 o'clock or so on a Tuesday, and I was still in bed. And my phone rang, and it was Bill. And I ignored it. And Bill called again, and I ignored it again. But unfortunately, Bill's kind of persistent, because a few minutes later, I heard a knock on my door. And when you're forgetful like I am, there's certain life maintenance tasks you just accept aren't going to happen. And back then, locking my door was one of those. So when I heard my doorknob start to turn, I panicked a bit. And at the time, I was sleeping on this really cheap mattress. It was like, it was one of those ones on the metal bed frames that has the plastic casters on it. And the bed had rolled a few feet away from the wall. There was a gap about this big. And I very slowly slid into that gap. I pulled the covers up over my head. And I just held my breath while Bill walked into my apartment. And he poked his head into my bedroom, and then into my office. And then he left. That's what shame feels like. I failed out of school. I moved back home with my parents. I didn't know how to tell them, so I lied to them. I told them I graduated. I started doing client work. I thought maybe I just wasn't cut out for school. Maybe if I just did something I'm really into. I loved web development, so I started doing that. But it's all the same things kept happening to me. I still couldn't get started on it unless it was 2 a.m. the night before the final, or in this case, the night before I had to talk to the client. So I start dodging calls from the client. I start dodging my parents coming home after I know they'll be in bed because I don't want to deal with the fact he's been calling the house, et cetera. And I just didn't get it. I didn't understand why this kept happening. Every time I told myself, this time it's going to be different. But it never was. And I had this friend in college. He said, Greg's one of the smartest people I know, but he's also the laziest person I know. And I believed that shit. I didn't have any other excuse for it. There's this verse in the Bible that says, I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I don't do. But instead, that which I hate, I do. And I hated what I was doing. So one night, in desperation, I went to the place that you go when you have questions about life that seem to have no answers. And I Googled it. I Googled chronic procrastination. And it wasn't long before I started reading about ADD, or adult attention deficit disorder, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Most of the terms are used, at least colloquially, interchangeably. And I had often joked that maybe I have ADD, but I never really meant it, because ADD is what lazy people have when they don't want to work hard, and that's not me. But I started reading a bunch of books about it, and I stumbled across this book by a guy named Tom Hartman. It's called The Edison Gene. And he helped me reframe ADD into something that was a little more palatable for me. His contention was that we shouldn't call it a disorder. It's just some people's brains work differently. And he said that the way in which these brains work that we call ADD is a genetic trait, or is due to a genetic trait, that inventors and creators and entrepreneurs like Thomas Edison had. He said it probably went back to 10,000 years ago when we had hunters and we had farmers. And he said hunters need to go out into new territory every day. They need to be able to scan the horizon. They need to be able to switch their attention rapidly from this to that new thing that came into their peripheral vision. Farmers need to be meticulous. They need to do the same thing every single day. You take a farmer, you try to make him hunt, he's going to be pretty bad at it. You take a hunter, try to make him farm, he's not going to be very good at it. And he said that the problem is not so much that people with ADD are broken, it's just that they should probably be working more in hunting type roles, and so much of our society, especially office culture today, looks way more like the day after day grind of farming. And so from him, I came to look at my ADD not so much as a disorder or something I should be ashamed of, but it was two things. One, it was a reason why I had such a hard time with school. It let me say, this is why it's that way. It's not because I'm a lazy bastard. It's not because I'm a moral failure. And the second thing was, it kind of made it feel like they were superpowers. He said that there are things that people with ADD are good at. They're really good under pressure. You take a person who doesn't have ADD, put them under pressure, they will procrastinate. They have a hard time focusing. But people with ADD, man, that's when they work best. So it took me about a year, but I finally worked up the courage, and I went to see a therapist. Slightly different, looked different than this one. Mine was actually a woman named Lori. And I saw Lori, I saw her once. I went through these tests. She has these questionnaires and whatnot. And I came back a couple weeks later. She says, "You definitely have ADD. You are off the charts." And I was like, yes. She says, "But I think you might also have bipolar." And I was like, no, I will take the ADD. And you can keep the bipolar. That's what crazy people have. I didn't know what bipolar was at the time. She told me that I have type 2 bipolar. Type 1 bipolar is also called manic depression. You cycle rapidly through highs, the mania, and the lows, depression. The cycles can happen very rapidly. You can go through them over the course of a single day. Type 2 bipolar, my bipolar, is more mild. The cycles are more elongated, and the highs aren't quite as high. War has before been described as long periods of boredom punctuated by moments of intense terror. I would describe my bipolar as long periods, say months, of lethargy and despair, punctuated by days of intense activity and enthusiasm. I could be really productive for a couple days. I'd have all these great ideas. I'd stay up late. I'd talk really fast. I'd journal a lot. Those were the days when I came up with new ideas for businesses, and I had to start them all tonight. I had to finish them all tonight, partially because I didn't know on Monday if I'd have enough emotional energy left over on Friday to keep working on stuff. But I didn't want to hear that. I didn't want to think about the bipolar. I mean, it took me a year to warm up to the ADD thing. And so I pretty much just lived my life for the next 2 years like that wasn't a thing. You know, I knew I'd gone through depression, but I didn't want to believe that I was broken inside. So I blamed everything else around me. I blamed my work. I blamed where I lived. So I thought it was college at one point. Then I thought it was living at home. Then I moved to Chicago. I got a good job with a software company. It started off great. And then after a few months, things started getting bad. And after about a year, I was pretty much not functional. It's like, well, maybe I'm just burned out on technology. So I quit that job. I go get a job working real estate, showing apartments. I was really good at that. I was doing sales. I was our best performer for a few months. Then things start getting bad again. And it was around this time that I met a guy named Josh Golden. He's the owner of Table XI, where I still work now. I met Josh playing poker, which I was doing a ton of at the time. As it turns out, people with bipolar have significantly higher risk tolerances than the general population. And that was where my most consistent stream of income was coming from. Josh and I became pretty good friends. He lived about a block down the street from me. He was running this web consulting company. And he said, when you get tired doing what you're doing, let me know. And one day I just straight up quit my job. I sent him a text, said, hey, if you're still interested, I'm available. And about 6 weeks later, I started working at Table XI. On that day, I started there. I had exactly $1 in my pocket and 70 cents in my bank account. I had been totally non-functional at my real estate job, and it was 100% commission. I showed up to work that day, and I didn't know how I was going to eat lunch. That was the day I found out Table XI provides lunch for its employees every day. Today we have a chef, really good. He's going to be on, Guy Fieri has a new TV show that just came out, I think. It's like a cooking show inside a supermarket sweep sort of thing. He's going to be on that. But back then we just had Josh just IM me. He said, send me your Jimmy John's order, and I got a sandwich, and things started getting good, just like all the other times. Table XI was amazing. We had a small team, it was 5 or 6 people. We had this cool loft office. We were working on all these interesting projects. I was doing great work. And then sure enough, a few months later, things started getting bad again. And after about 9 months, 12 months, I was right back to where I was. I went through weeks when I didn't show up to the office until 2 o'clock. I was just dropping the ball every time it was put into my hands. Things finally came to a head one day. I had this project I was working on. It was due on a Friday. And I had been trying to just start on it all week, and I wasn't able to. And then Thursday night, I stayed at the office really late. I left defeated, went home, I set my alarm. I said I'd get up early and work on it. And I overslept my alarm. And this was the day that Josh was flying to Italy to propose to the woman that's now his wife. Josh lives a block down the street from me, and I still don't lock my doors. And so once again, I woke up, someone coming to my apartment in the afternoon, saying, hey, Greg, are you in here? And this time, there was no hole for me to hide in. I told myself, I don't know how to control this. So I'm just going to isolate the damage to myself. I'm just going to keep it here and make sure no one else gets hurt. What I had to realize was that you can't do that. If you are suffering with mental illness, The people around you, your friends, your loved ones, your co-workers, they all suffer with you as well. I set up an appointment that day with a psychiatrist. I went to see him a few weeks later. I told him my story. He said, you know what, you're really fortunate. He said, we've got these meds, it's called Lamictal. They're mood stabilizers. They work really well for people who have type 2 bipolar. He said that very, very few side effects. There's one side effect, it doesn't happen very often, a very small number of cases. You'll end up getting a life-threatening rash inside your anus. And I said, well, I'm pretty sure that if I get a life-threatening rash inside my anus, I'm still going to be depressed. That didn't happen. It's been about 5 years. Every time I get an itch, though, I am ridiculously fortunate. I got on the right meds. They worked the first time. I had health insurance because Table XI didn't fire me, even though they had lots of reasons to. Well, these are my meds I take. 4 hours after I set an appointment with a psychiatrist, I met Rachel, who's sitting right over here, my wife. And as Mark said to me on Twitter the other day, the secret to a great life, or secret to life, is to get a great wife. And Rachel came alongside me, and she helped pull me out of the hole I was in. Earlier, a couple hours ago, we were flipping through this. She's like, what was that picture? I was like, don't worry about it, honey, it's fine. It's nothing. Rachel likes to crochet. She's a physician's assistant. Come say hi to her and talk to her. A lot of people who have what I have, they're not as lucky. It's estimated about 5% of the population has bipolar. 1 in 3 will attempt suicide at some point in their life. And 10 to 20% will die from it. It actually has a higher mortality rate than some forms of cancer. So this begs the question, why am I talking to you about this today? As a show of hands, how many of you know someone, a friend or a coworker or a loved one who has struggled with depression? Yeah. That's been really surprising for me as I've been talking to people. And if you're willing to, no pressure, how many of you have struggled with depression yourself? Thank you so much for saying that. These are some cherry-picked symptoms of type 2 bipolar and ADD. So hyper-focusing. Sure, it's hard to get started on something, but once you start working on it, you lock in, 12 hours can blur away. You forget to eat, you forget to use the bathroom. Racing thoughts, they're pretty much exactly what it sounds like. Pressured speech is when those racing thoughts try to escape through the small hole of your mouth. Social isolation. Irregular sleep patterns, especially onset insomnia, where it's hard to fall asleep at night. It's impossible to wake up in the morning. Thoughts of grandiosity, thinking that the rules don't apply to you, thinking that you can solve problems that have eluded all of mankind. There's a good chance that if you're a kid, if you're a young adult, you struggle with these symptoms, finding software is going to feel a lot like coming home to you. You want to stay up all night, work till 3 in the morning, sleep till noon, that's fine. You want to not have any friends, you want to not bathe, grow a neck beard, talk to people's shoes. We're your people. And thoughts of grandiosity are pretty much a requirement for being in this room here today. We have our heroes have shout out calls to the general population saying, come join us. There's the Apple commercial, Steve Jobs. He says, here's to the crazy ones. He says, because while others see crazy, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to believe that they can change the world are the ones who do. We had a guy like that come interview with us last year at Table XI. His name was Caleb Kornman. He came to us after working at 4 of the best software Ruby on Rails shops in Chicago. He'd only spent about a year or less at each one, so that raised some red flags. But he was so bright, he was so eager, and we brought him on. And I got to work with him. I was working as basically a junior web developer, junior Rails dev last year. And he and I worked together on the project. We were rebuilding RogerEbert.com. And I learned so much from him. He was just so bright. He had that rare combination of just being so technically gifted, but being a patient and just brilliant teacher. But a few weeks after he started coming in, he started showing up late, started calling in sick. The excuse was a little different every time. And it just all felt too familiar to me. Now, what I found is that if you think someone has bipolar, you can't just walk up to them and say, hey, I think you have bipolar. You should see someone for that. So what I found works is to do basically what I'm doing here, which is just to share your story. And I know some of you might have someone you might want to talk to, and you don't know how to do that. And maybe you haven't struggled with depression or bipolar or whatever, but everybody has something that they're ashamed of. Everyone has something that they'd probably rather not share. And when you share that with someone, it creates a safe place for them to do the same for you. And that's what happened with Caleb. And he said, yeah, you know, I've kind of wondered for a while if maybe I might have something like that, but what am I going to do? It's not like I'm just going to cold call a bunch of psychiatrists from the Yellow Pages. I gave him a couple numbers. He called around. He found someone. He set up an appointment for a couple weeks out. His appointment was set up for a Friday. The day before his appointment, he sent an email to the team saying, hey, I'm not gonna make it in today. And then he sent me this email. He said, I can't thank you enough for helping to guide me down the path to seek some help with these issues that have been going on in my life for a very long time. Right now, I'm struggling with a lot of things in my head and my emotions. It's kept me up the last 2 nights, and that in turn has taken a toll on my mental and physical capacity this morning. I'm scared that if I come into work, I'm going to make a fool of myself with our guests today. I think it would be better if I just waited it out and just focused on making it to my appointment tomorrow. I came into the office on Monday. I was excited to ask him how it was, but he wasn't there. And I knew if he missed too many more days at work, then we were pretty lenient, but he probably wasn't going to last much longer. And Josh got in, and Josh was like, Greg, can I see you in the office? And I go in, he says, I have some terrible news. And I was like, did he no-call, no-show again? And Josh was like, what? I was like, oh, never mind, what do you have to say? He said, Caleb died. We found out later that he had died of an accidental drug overdose. He had had problems with addiction for a while. His friend said the problem with Caleb was he was just so damn smart. He was really good at making it seem like it wasn't a very big deal. This is a picture from the memorial we had for him at his favorite brewery up in Chicago. The thing that pisses me off the most about this is that Caleb died from an overdose on speed. And speed is an amphetamine. The meds that I take to treat my ADD are dextroamphetamine. My guess is that Caleb started taking amphetamines for the same reason that I did, because they helped. My guess is that Caleb died self-medicating an untreated mental illness. We have a lot of tragedies like this in our industry. You guys probably recognize Aaron Schwartz. He committed suicide earlier this year. He was the co-founder of Reddit. And in 2007, Aaron Schwartz wrote this. He said, I feel ashamed to have an illness. It sounds absurd, but there still is enormous stigma around being sick. I don't want to use being ill as an excuse, although sometimes I wonder how much more productive I'd be if I wasn't so sick. Surely there have been times when you've been sad. Perhaps a loved one has abandoned you, or a plan has gone horribly awry. Your face falls, perhaps you cry. You feel worthless. You wonder whether it's worth going on. Everything you think about seems bleak. The things you've done, the things you hope to do, the people around you. You want to lie in bed and keep the lights off. Depressed mood is like that, only it doesn't come for any reason, and it doesn't go for any either. Go outside and get some fresh air or cuddle with a loved one, and you don't feel any better, only more upset at being unable to feel the joy that everyone else seems to feel. Everything gets colored by the sadness. Depression affects 1 in 6, yet sadly it is not seen as real enough to deserve the investment and awareness of conditions like breast cancer, which affects 1 in 8, or AIDS, which affects 1 in 150. And there is, of course, the shame. The shame is what's killing us. It's the shame and the stigma around mental illness are the reasons why people like Caleb can suffer with this stuff for their whole lives. Working in an industry full of people who are going through the same stuff and never get help for it. You know, we don't have a cure for mental illness. We have really good treatments though. But the reason why people don't get to those treatments is because of the stigma. And we have a cure for the stigma. We just talk about it. It's that simple. We just talk about it. We talk about it and we talk about it. You know, it's weird. If I stood up here, I told you guys that I had cancer, I wouldn't be afraid anyone would say, oh, it's just all in your head. You know, if I told you that I, say, took insulin for diabetes, no one would say, aren't you afraid you're going to be dependent on that for the rest of your life? No one would say, you know, aren't you afraid you're just using that as a crutch? You know, those words are kind of weird too, right? All in my head. You know, my depression is all in my head in the same way that Lance Armstrong's testicular cancer was all in his ball. And crutches are actually pretty helpful. You know, nobody ever says, hey, did you see Joe broke his leg? Yeah, but I think he's just using that tall, weight-bearing padded pole as a crutch. You know, crutches help injured people go out and live their lives without hurting themselves more. It's weird that using it as a crutch has become synonymous with being lazy, because anyone who's ever actually used a crutch will tell you it's way easier to stay on the couch. We have different rules, though, right, for how we treat illnesses that affect everything that happened below the neck than for everything that happens in our brains. And I think this is probably especially true for us here in this room, because a lot of us have spent all of our life being praised for how well our brain works. We've built identities on that. We've built careers on that. And considering that our brain might possibly be malfunctioning, well, that could possibly chip away at the identity, at our own identity and our self-worth. You know, I was reluctant to seek help for this stuff. I didn't want to see someone, and I certainly didn't want to take meds. I didn't want to screw with the way my brain worked. I was afraid it would kill my creativity. And if you define creativity by one's ability to create, I am an order of magnitude more creative today than I was 5 years ago. Today I ship. Today, the folder of projects on my computer that I have started and finished is way bigger than the project of folders that I started and then abandoned. And I had never been able to say that before. You know, now I can do a little bit every single day, and I know eventually I'm going to get there. You know, and most importantly, I can be reliable. I can do things like show up on time. I can tell friends I'll be there, and I'm there. And I don't have to worry that I'm going to be crippled and lying in bed. If some of this strikes home a little bit too much, I would just encourage you to talk to someone. Maybe you might want to consider seeing a therapist. I know there's a lot of stigma around seeing a therapist, which is unfortunate. Michael Jordan had a coach. A therapist is an objective third party. Their job is basically just to listen to you, talk about the way you live your life, and then help point you in the right direction. Maybe you're not ready to see a therapist. Talk to a friend. If you don't have anyone else to talk to me. I'm here for the next couple days. Send me an email. So Greg at TableXI, if you want to chat, I will tweet, or actually early did tweet my email address. Find me on there. I know that it's hard to do. We got these name tags, right? Last night I picked up my name tag. We went to the reception. My name tag here, it says, talk to me about I have bipolar and ADHD. And what I do as soon as I got my name tag, I turned it around and put it like this. I was talking up here in front of a whole bunch of people, that's fine. But I get it. I've been doing this for 6 months. Like every time before I talk to someone about this, I hear this little voice in the back of my head. It says, don't do it. It says, don't do it. Don't burden them with your problems. They will shun you. It's not true. It's lying to you. In the last 6 months I've been blown away by people's responses. I encourage you to do the same. And if there are some of you up there who are feeling quite bleak right now, you've been trying to change and things have not been getting better, just know 10 years ago, I was lying in bed and I was praying that God wouldn't wake me up. 5 years ago, the day that I set up the appointment with a psychiatrist, I had no hot water in my apartment. We didn't have enough money to turn the gas back on. And today, I'm standing on stage at the Business of Software conference with my beautiful wife watching over here. Things get better, but we need to start talking about it more. Thank you very much.